Cosby that NBC had changed their mind and canceled the show because during the third year the ratings had fallen down because it had been moved opposite Carol Burnett. And they had come down. It went from being a top 10 show to, it dropped down a bit, but it was still a hit. And it had a young demographic. And they wanted it for more years. So it did not get canceled. But that's what they were told. And then he told somebody else that he was canceling it because he was tired of fighting with Culp. And he told somebody else that he was going to cancel it because NBC was offering Bill Cosby a sitcom, and Cosby was thinking of leaving after the next year, and it wouldn't be any point in doing it without Cosby. He told different stories to different people. Well, I went back in my research, and I found out the reason why it got canceled. It was this thing that happened between him and Mort Werner at NBC over My Friend Tony. And I told this to Bob Culp, when I was interviewing him. I said, this is why you got canceled. He said, I don't believe it. No, Sheldon told us the ratings dropped. I said, Bob, here's the ratings. You were doing fine. And everything else. And I think I told you this story before, Gary, maybe off the air when we were chatting about I Spy. But the next time I saw him or talked to Bob Culp, he was like really depressed. And I said, what's the matter? And he says, I've been telling people the wrong thing for 30 years. I've been telling them we got canceled because of the ratings, and that's what Sheldon had told me, and he wasn't telling me the truth, and I believed this lie, and I'd passed this lie on and everything. And he said, I called Bill, and Bill didn't believe him either, and I sent him the paperwork that you had, and he believes you now. And he was really down, and because he had felt betrayed by Sheldon, finding out 35 years later, or 40 years later, whatever it was, that he had not been told the truth and that the show had been taken away from them because Sheldon got into a fight with Mort Werner. It really hit him. And then a week later, I call him because I had to ask him a couple questions to confirm some information. And I call him, and it's Bob. It's not Robert, it's Bob. And I say, hey, Mark, it's Bob. How you doing? I say, hey, Bob, you sound great. What's going on? He says, I'm on top of the world. I said, why? What's happened? And he said, I was down for about a week, but I realized we went out on top.
Oh, yeah. I wonder,
so
thinking back, 30, 35 years, you find out, how much resentment would all of a sudden appear. I have to be honest with you. The few times chatting with Robert, texting and all that stuff and emails, he would tell me that he put his heart and soul in that show. I mean, he put everything into it. So could you imagine all of a sudden to be told, hey, your ratings have dropped, so you're canceled. And then all of a sudden to find out 30-some years later that, hey, your ratings were great. The person who, that you looked up to betrayed you. Yeah.
Out of my ignorance, I thought I was bringing him great news. And I was surprised by his reaction. Now I totally understand it, of course. I was being kind of silly, not realizing how it might hit him. And I totally get it. But I was so happy that a week later he was able to pull himself out of that. Because he and Sheldon butted heads, and they really didn't get along very well towards the end anyway. So it wasn't like there was any love lost there, But he felt betrayed. He felt foolish. But after about a week or so, he decided just to look at it in a positive way and say, no, we still had the audience. We still, the show was still working.
Oh, yeah. Now.
And what you just said is so true, Gary, because, I asked him, every year for 3 years, Bill Cosby won the Emmy as Best Lead Actor in a one-hour drama. And all 3 of those years, he was up against Bob Culp. Has that ever happened before or since, that the 2 stars of a TV show are up against each other in the same category, and one of them wins 3 years in a row and the other one loses? And I asked Bob how he felt about that, and he said, it didn't bother me. I felt vindicated. Because remember, he had written the part for Bill. He had written the love story for Bill. He had done those first bunch of scripts and just holed up in his office for weeks and weeks and weeks, where his family didn't even see him. So he could write these scripts that would set the tone of the show and set the tone of the relationship between these 2 characters. And for Cosby to be able to win an Emmy, that changed the world. The same year that Sidney Poitier was the first black to win an Oscar as a lead, was the year that Bill Cosby was the first black to win an Emmy as a lead.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, talk about, just an amazing change in 1 year. And Culp made that happen because something we haven't talked about yet. God, there's so much to talk about. Cosby didn't know how to act. You know, he had instincts. He did a lot of acting in his stand-up. He could play different parts in his stand-up, and that's what Sheldon Leonard saw. But when they went out and did the pilot, the test run, it wasn't a pilot, it was a test film, it was really difficult for Cosby. He'd never been out of the country, and he had never done serious acting in this way. He'd always just performed in front of a live audience, and he was really lost. And so during the first half of that first year, what Culp would do is he had a signal that he would give to the director of photography, Fleet Southcoff. And he would give him this little signal, and Fleet would say, take 20 minutes, everybody, we got to do a lighting adjustment. They didn't need to do a lighting adjustment. This is something Culp and Fleet worked out. What was happening is Bill was not bringing it forward. He was not making it happen. So Culp would give him this little signal, and then Bill and Culp would go off into another room or out into the alley or whatever they had to go, and they would run the scene. And when Bill had it, they would come back on stage and do it. So talk about having somebody's back. I mean, Culp was really helping Cosby. And then Cosby wins the Emmy that year as Best Actor in a TV series against Culp. And I said, you taught him to act. You wrote him these lines. You taught him to act. How did you feel? And he said, I felt vindicated. I wouldn't have felt better if I had won, because this was such an important thing for television and for the world, to have a black actor win this Emmy. It's so important, and it's so important for the show. And so he felt vindicated. And he was thrilled each year that Cosby won, because he said, this is great. Now, 2 Emmys in a row. This is great. 3 Emmys. This is making history.
Yeah, too bad it wouldn't have been 4.
He said, if I had won, it's just another white guy winning an Emmy. He said, but Cosby winning, this is making history. This is for the history books. And he had a major hand in making that happen. So that was important to him, more important than winning the Emmy himself. That's the kind of guy he was.
Oh, yeah. Now, for people...
How many actors would feel good about not winning an Emmy because their best friend and their colleague and their partner gets to win it instead? Probably none.
Well, I think...
Only Bob Culp.
Yeah, I think, Bob... They connected so much that they could have been brothers. I mean, seriously. And that was quite apparent on every episode. One thing I will say, a lot of people want to know who Leonard Shelton was. If you go back in the 40s and watch some gangster movies, he always played the gangster. Mm-hmm. The tough guy.
The tough guy.
Yeah, and I think that carried on all the way through his whole life, the tough guy.
Oh, he intimidated people, totally, as a producer. He always had that cigar, and he always talked like he was from the Bronx, and he was a big guy, and they had all grown up watching him on these movies, playing the tough mobster. And so Sheldon could get things done. He could intimidate people. He could make NBC back down. He could make Greek generals back down who were overthrowing the country. He could get it done, but he couldn't get Bob Culp to back down because Bob was an artist, and Bob would sacrifice everything for the show.
Oh, yeah.
And he did.
Oh, yeah.
He did.
I saw on YouTube, and I can't remember, maybe about a year or two ago, some outtakes of I Spy and all that stuff with Leonard and all that stuff in the studio. And Leonard and actually Robert Culp kind of got into a little argument, and then it was naturally cut out from there. But Robert stood his grounds, always, with Leonard.
Yeah, and when they did the reunion movie in the mid-'90s, Culp had written a brilliant script for it, which I have, and it has those storyboards in it too. that he did, and it's wonderful. But Sheldon had his own script because he wanted to use that reunion movie to do a spin-off. So he wanted to introduce the kids, the son and the daughter of Scotty and Kelly, who were then going to carry on in the tradition of spying. I mean, just your typical god-awful, cliched bullshit TV premise.
And it didn't go
Coming
anywhere.
out of one of the greatest shows ever made, trying to spawn and give birth to what would have probably been one of the worst shows ever made. And Culp and Cosby saw this script, and they didn't want to do it. I mean, they really didn't. But Culp had a couple bad years, and he had a divorce and 2 divorces, and so he was broke at that point. It's tragic to think a star of his caliber of being in all these different series
now,
that point of 3 different series.
Mark, a lot of people don't realize, though, what they were paid versus what actors get paid today is nothing. I mean, nowadays you
$2,500 an episode.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Of course, that 25 was like worth $5,000-6,000, but that's nothing compared to nowadays. So, I mean, yeah. Regardless, if you could go buy a 3-cent, 5-cent candy bar, the point is that their wealth they had is not like the wealth of actors of today.
Oh, they get $500,000 now. Some get $1 million per episode. These guys were getting $2,500, $3,000 an episode, and that would translate to maybe about $20,000 today. It's a big difference. And so, yeah, you're on a hit show for a few years, and then you're guest starring or doing things like that. But you don't have the money that you have now. So, Cosby was doing very well. He had done the Cosby Show, and he was just doing great. Culp wasn't. He was hurting. And so they talked on the phone. And it was always so dramatic, Gary, being in the room with Bob Culp, and because he was so open, he was so honest. Most people would try to put up a front and not admit to you that they had been broke and things like this. He would just be honest. And he'd say, so I'm talking to Bill on the phone, and Bill says, what do you want to do? Sheldon's script is terrible. Your script's good, but Sheldon's refusing to do your script. He wants to do his. What do you want to do? And Bob said to Bill, he said, I hate to do this. I just don't want to do it. And he says, yeah, I don't either, but it's up to you. Because Bill Cosby was loyal to Bob Culp because he knew that Bob Culp gave him a career, And he said, so it's up to you. What do you want to do? And he said, Bill, I need the money. And so they did it. They did that reunion movie, and they hated it.
Well, if they would have done Robert's, who knows? Maybe I Spy could have came back, as an older generation with the 2 original stars. Who knows?
Or as a series of movies like Star Trek did.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Culp had written a feature, a script that could have been a feature film. It was beautiful. The emotion was in there. The honesty was in there. The banter was in there. The comedy, the drama, everything. The moodiness of Kelly. 1 minute telling jokes with Scotty, the next minute, getting into trouble because of his dark side. It was all in there. It showed that this guy knows that show, just like Gene Roddenberry knew Star Trek. It was Bob Culp who knew I Spy, who knew those characters. And this script is just incredible. And the one they did was just horrible. I was so disappointed when I saw it on TV.
I couldn't even watch
it. Later to then have Bob give me the script and that they wanted to do, and I'm reading it and going, my God, Sheldon didn't want to do this? No, because it couldn't have been used as a spin-off.
Yeah.
So that was that. Not to be putting down Sheldon. I mean, Sheldon Leonard was an amazing talent and an amazing character. I mean, I fell in love with Sheldon Leonard writing this book, and I also got very angry with Sheldon Leonard writing this book. I never met him. I interviewed his family, his daughter, and his partners and so forth, but he had passed away. But you couldn't not like Sheldon. I mean, what a character. And there wouldn't have been an I Spy if it wasn't for Sheldon, and there wouldn't have been that interracial casting if it wasn't for Sheldon. He was the one who played the bluff with NBC. He was the one who was willing to dare to do it. So you've got to give him his tribute. But he wasn't a writer. And he would have said differently because he took writing in college and stuff. And he did do some scripts early in his career. But he wasn't a writer in the caliber of what Bob Culp The thing about Bob Culp and Gene Roddenberry both, and I see a lot of parallels, but they were sister shows. I Spy